Mano, no puedo. Ahora sí.
It's okay. So everyone say hi recording. We are being recorded.
Hi, recording.
So last class
Hi,
we
recording. Hello.
yes.
Hey,
So
thank you.
last class on Friday we had a discussion about whether if Mexico and its modern form is more influenced by conservatism or by liberalism. And we kind of started the discussion bringing up the Declaration of Independence of Mexico, right?
Yes. Yes.
And what topics did we touch upon? What did we talk about specifically?
But there was not, they were not inclusive, like slaves didn't count as people.
Uh-huh. No, there was no slavery in Mexico at the, it was
Well,
already
they
illegal.
didn't use.
No, I'm talking about Mexico.
But nothing changed. Well, a lot of things didn't change. Like the church still have a lot of power in people. Like also that they have the same government.
As what?
Like the same government.
What do you
They
mean the same
didn't
government?
change.
Oh, you mean the structure didn't change from colonial times to after independence? All right.
Charge of everything.
What else? So we figured out that the Declaration of Independence of Mexico is a fiercely conservative document, right? Even from the point of the signatures, we see a white general who wants to be emperor, a bishop, and the viceroy. Right? And we also see conservative ideas like what Pamela was mentioning about the role of the church, about not changing a rigid social structure that existed from colonial times. What else?
The church is still powerful.
Yes, we already mentioned that. What else?
Oh, right.
And that the radical ideas of liberalism, like equality and freedom of speech, weren't really applied.
Well, not really mentioned at all, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's do a quick review where we bring up exactly what we are talking about. So, when we talk about conservatism, we bring up specific ideas, and when we talk about liberalism, it's a few other specific ideas. So what are liberal ideas?
It's about
radical ideas.
radical.
What radical ideas?
Change.
Perspective, innovation.
Individual perspective, innovation. What else?
Like the common.
No.
What's it called like that?
Well, are there different social strata, people who are, some are better than others?
No.
No.
No, we have equality.
Equality.
Is there a rigid social structure that tells people what to do?
No.
No, really.
So freedom, right? People are free to choose whatever they want, whatever makes them happy, whatever they can give to society, right? Now, a very important thing to bring up here is think of when the United States declares its independence and signs its constitution. Does it ever talk about a unit? Are they always like, these are the United States, this is a new country, and we are independent now? Or was there kind of the option for states to join or not join, or maybe stay in Canada or whatever?
No, there was the
unity. There is.
So in liberalism, we have kind of the concept of a union where maybe smaller communities form a larger community because they decide to, because it's the right thing to do, because it works for them, right? So it's about how maybe at some point California could join the United States, but it wasn't part of a unit, right? They had to decide to join for moral reasons.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about
nationalism, could be.
What?
nationalism could be in the part of liberalism.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's part of what I'm talking about, union, right? Because nationalism is this whole idea that countries should be able to act independently, and maybe at some point you are like, part of acting independently is becoming a union, right? Acting together because it's the better way to do it. Now, when we talk about conservatism, what do we find?
Rigid social structure.
Very good. So is everyone equal?
No.
No.
Not at all. And there is no need for freedom because your social status is what tells you what to do, right?
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you're
It's a great value.
you have to do certain things, and if you are a lower class worker, you have to do certain things. It's not about deciding what to do.
Also, I think it about the religion that the religion has power, right?
So
Or that's
here
not necessary.
we see a very specific focus on tradition,
Yeah.
Okay.
which leads us into the very important role of religion, which is what Diana is bringing up.
Okay.
Right? So it's not specifically like religion has to tell us what to do, but it's a focus on tradition, on doing things how we've always done them, because we've always done them that way because they work, right?
Okay.
It's not this irrational issue with not wanting to innovate. It's because if you do things a certain way for centuries, it's because they work, right? And part of that is the role of the church. Because think of it this way, what are some things that in a conservative society the church takes care of, and that in a liberal society they couldn't really take care of?
Money.
Marriage.
Right?
Birth.
Taxes. The church would charge el diezmo, the tithe.
Yeah, el diezmo.
What else?
Well, the church could say what was wrong and what was right.
So moral judgments were made by the church, right?
They also control this, where you go and say, I have a son, and
El registro civil, right? So the church was the one
Yeah.
the church would be the one keeping track of how many people were born, how many people died, how many people got married, right?
Yeah.
Also
Now-
in crash course, they said like church control people's time because when the
Yeah, they
bells
gave the hour.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the issue here is, in a conservative society, does the government need to know all these things about its own society? Do they need to know how many people are there, what their characteristics are,
No.
what they need?
No.
Not really,
Not really.
right? Because who
No.
makes the decisions here?
The king,
king or
and
Or
the high class.
yes,
Right? Whoever is in charge makes decisions. And do they need to justify them morally? Do they need to be
No.
doing these
Not
things?
really.
Not really, right?
Oh.
So even nowadays we see this in how authoritarian governments don't really need a lot of information about their own society. If you look for information, for example, about the population of North Korea, it's very difficult to find it because they don't really generate that information because they don't really need it, right? The government just makes decisions based on other things, usually what the dictator wants. But in a liberal society, where you have to justify your decisions and figure out what's best for everyone, do you actually need to know how many people there are, how many families, what their characteristics are, what their needs are?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you do.
It's very necessary, right? It's impossible to justify these things without information, and you need to generate that information. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why having el registro civil be in the government is very important in a liberal regime, but not in a conservative one. Now, what else? What else is conservative? Instead of equality, what do we have?
Well, we have social class.
Said something about patriarchy.
Also,
in
is
crash
slavery?
courses. Crash courses.
What else?
Is the slavery a conservatism, or is not necessary to be?
Well, the thing is slavery compatible with liberalism?
No. No.
But is it compatible with conservatism?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not that conservatives specifically say slavery is part of our system, but it is compatible with conservatism and not with liberalism. Okay. Now, instead of freedom, what do we have?
Well, people are like
They are oppressed.
Like responsibilities, but given
So social class gives you
You don't have
responsibility.
options.
Responsibilities. You don't need options because you're being told exactly what to do. Now, this goes into a whole questioning of what exactly makes people happy, right? Nowadays, we are biased and we're conditioned to think that what makes us happy is doing what we want. But even nowadays, there are many people, and back in the 19th century, it was more people that actually thought that what makes people happy is having certainty and familiarity and knowing what's going to happen, which is something you can empathize with, right? Think of it this way. What is more enjoyable? When someone gives you a quiz and you can choose not to do it, but it's a surprise? Or when you know exactly the day you're going to have a quiz and you know it's going to be super easy?
When you know.
well to know.
To know, right? We want to know what's going on. We want to know what we're going to deal with. So there is a part of human nature that wants certainty, but there is also a part of human nature that kind of wants to choose, right?
Yeah.
So if we go really deep, that's kind of what this argument is about. Now, in terms of union, in conservatism, we don't really see this idea that countries are formed by willing communities that decide to unite, but we see the concept of union, right? Think of, for example, Austria-Hungary and it being threatened by nationalism because nationalism was threatening its unity, right?
yeah,
It's the unity is this idea that countries are one thing, they're one unit, and if part of it is taken away, they're supposed to take it back, right? They have a right to that part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about these two before the semester, and we talked about these two on Friday. Which part is more influential in Mexico at the time of independence?
Conservatism.
Right? Because in the Declaration of Independence of Mexico, do we see anything related to we are Mexicans, so nationalism, or do we see any nationalism? Do we see any type of, so each Mexican state should be willing to join?
Even there's no equality.
Do we see any mention of equality or freedom of Mexicans?
Well, there was kind of equality, but not for everyone.
Where was it? That's not a thing.
That's not equality.
Yeah, you can show equality, but not equality.
Yeah, well, yeah. I don't know how to explain it.
Because you can't have todos ser iguales, pero unos más iguales que otros. You can't have that is literally the definition of not equality.
No, but
that's from Animal Farm, right?
Yeah. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
That's the whole point. They're not equal, right? Now, it's very important that words have a meaning. You can't say things like that because that is what Donald Trump does.
And you don't want to be like Donald Trump.
Orwellian dystopia, we're going to die.
Yeah. So we know that at the time of independence, Mexico was eminently conservative, right? The entire idea in the Declaration of Independence is to maintain the rigid social structure from colonial times, to maintain the important role of the church, to maintain the aristocracy, to have social class give people responsibilities as opposed to allowing individuals to choose, and to maintain the unity of the Mexican Empire, which was supposed to be one thing, regardless of what people in each part of the empire thought, right? Now, we see this in many parts of the document, especially in the signatures, when we see the first three signatures being the emperor, the bishop, and the viceroy. What? But could we say that liberal ideas are completely foreign to us nowadays?
No.
Right now, do we focus on individual perspective? Or like in school, do they sometimes tell you, no, you choose the topic of your work, it's fine? Do we talk about states and each state being able to do whatever it wants? Do we talk about...
No.
Yeah.
Do we have an aristocracy?
More or less, like, states cannot do whatever they want, because they need to follow like same
They follow the
kind
Constitution.
of rules.
They follow
But
the
they have
Constitution.
their own constitution, so they can decide
Yeah.
whether if they accept gay marriage or they don't.
Yeah, so that's liberalism, right?
It's a weird mixture between.
Yes.
Yeah, and the issue is, we talked about independence, and at that point, conservatism is key. But nowadays, liberalism is very important in our lives. It's central to how Mexico sees itself and how Mexicans see themselves. So the question is, how do we come up with this weird mixture of conservatism and liberalism of our minds? And the answer might not surprise you, because it's the war of reform, la guerra de reforma.
Yeah.
Now, the issue here is, when we learn about the war of reform in school, in primaria and secundaria, we are generally given a list of events, a list of documents, and we are told liberales, conservadores, these are liberal, these are conservative, and who won? Liberals, right?
Liberals.
So we're not going to focus on that kind of thing right now, because it's kind of boring, and also because we don't really need it for the purposes of this class. What we are going to focus on is, one second. What we are going to focus on is the impact of liberalism in this extremely conservative society. So the issue here is, I don't need you to learn in specific events, and I don't need you to focus on individuals like we usually do in history class, right? Where people are like, Benito Juárez, biografía de Benito Juárez. Maximiliano de Habsburgo, biografía de Maximiliano de Habsburgo. Not the point here. The point here is to know that this is the point in our history when liberalism becomes relevant, and to be able to pick apart the liberal elements from the conservative elements, right? The first challenge here is to figure out what the conflict between the Second Mexican Empire, so Maximiliano, and the Federal Republic, which was Juárez, what their conflict was actually about. Was it about theory? Was one of them conservative and one of them liberal?
Yeah.
That's kind of what they want.
Now, the thing here is to be very clear about how, yes, conservatives were the ones that chose Maximiliano and brought him to Mexico. But when he was here during the 3 years of the Second Mexican Empire, he was a liberal monarch. It was a liberal monarchy, right?
Yes.
He wanted a legislature. He gave people rights. He wanted a constitution, right?
Yes.
So it was a liberal monarchy. Similarly, what type of republic did Juárez want?
A liberal republic.
Very liberal, right? Because he made his whole career fighting Santa Anna, who was a conservative president.
Yeah.
Right? And he wanted to give people rights. He wanted to have the government take control of el registro civil. He wanted to have people pay taxes. He tried to ban the church, right? Very liberal. So if both the emperor and the president are liberal, what is the conflict actually about?
Monarchy and republic.
Another thing is they had very similar ways of governing, really, because Maximiliano was liberal, but he was also an emperor, so he governed by decree mostly. And Juárez was liberal, but he also was not okay with la gente necia, so he also governed by decree, which is why there's this whole notion that Juárez, if he had been alive longer, he would have become a dictator, because he was pretty much a dictator while he was president, right?
Okay.
So if we have these two people who are fighting each other, but they are not fighting about the ideas of their governments, and they are not fighting about the way they should govern, what are they actually fighting about?
Who's got the power?
Who gets the power?
Who's in charge, right? They were the fight between Juárez and Maximiliano was mostly about who was in charge. So, I mean, that's not really an issue of liberalism versus conservatism. Yeah, it's mostly an issue of nationalism, really, because Juárez, his main argument was not that Maximiliano was doing things wrong. It wasn't that Maximiliano had too much power. It was that Maximiliano was what? not Mexican, right?
Not Mexican.
Now, in monarchy, what?
Nothing.
Now, in other monarchies, that's not really an issue. Where do you think the British royal family is from?
Greece. Greece.
I don't have idea.
I mean,
Well, Prince Philip is from Greece. Where is Queen Elizabeth from?
England-ish.
What?
Hungary.
What?
I mean, they're kind of mixed, right?
They're German, mostly German. Now, the thing is, Queen Elizabeth was born in Great Britain, but her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, was German, extremely German, right? Similarly, where is the Spanish royal family from? France, correct? France, they're from France. And before the Bourbones were the kings of Spain, they had the Habsburgs, and where are the Habsburgs from?
From
Austria.
Austria, right? So in the realm of monarchies, having a foreign monarch is not that relevant, right? You're like, I mean, fine. As long as they do a good job, you're not going to be like, no, tiene que ser mexicano. That's a liberal idea, right? Yeah. So mostly we have to keep this in mind about how the theoretical disagreements in the Reform War, it was not really between Maximiliano and Juarez. It was mostly between people who supported Santa Anna and people who supported Juarez. So now we're gonna read a couple of documents, El Plan de Ayutla y El Plan de Tacubaya. So, like I said, we're not gonna go through lists of events, or battles, really. That's not very relevant. But what I do need you to be able to do, and I need you to be super awesome at it, is to be able to read a document and point out if it's liberal or conservative or both.
Okay.
Right? Yeah?
Okay.
So the whole thing here is making a gross oversimplification. We have the independence of Mexico. People are not happy about it, so they start a war and create a...
espera, no te estoy escuchando el de las estufas, lavadoras y todo eso.
Is that on your side, Diana?
No, pero es que casi no te escuchaba.
Okay. No, what I was saying is that after independence, there is fights over who is going to be in charge once they get rid of Iturbide. The person that seems to win at first is a guy called Antonio López de Santa Anna, who becomes president of a central republic a bunch of times and is mostly a conservative president, right?
He was lovely.
He maintains a rigid social structure. He maintains an important role for the church. He makes himself be called Su Alteza Serenísima. Now, this is not as unusual as people want us to believe. Nowadays, in South America, it's very common for presidents to have a title, right? And even presidents of what?
South America?
Yeah. Yeah, for example, the president of Ecuador is called Su Alteza. That's what they call him.
No, really?
Because he wants, or because that's what
the Constitution says. So, yeah, so it's not that unusual. But the issue is, Antonio López de Santa Anna was very conservative. And at one point, liberal factions of Mexican society are like, well, liberal factions that are more influenced by American movements, American independence, and so on, are like, nothing really changed with independence. This is not what we asked for, right? We want a government that actually responds to our needs. So they fight President Santa Anna in La Revolución de Ayutla, and this starts with the Plan de Ayutla, which is what we're going to read now. So, can someone please read this section of the Plan de Ayutla, Santiago?
Considerando que la permanencia de don Antonio López de Santa Anna en el exclusión absoluta de cualquier otro sistema de gobierno, poder es un amago constante para las libertades públicas, puesto que con el mayor escándalo bajo su gobierno se han hollado las garantías individuales. Solo ha venido a oprimir y dejar a los pueblos recargándolos de contribuciones onerosas sin consideración a la pobreza general, empleándose su producto en gastos superfluos y formar la fortuna como en otra época de unos cuantos favoritos. Debiendo conservar la integridad del territorio de la República, ha venido una parte considerable de ella sacrificando a nuestros hermanos de la frontera del norte. Las instituciones republicanas son las únicas que convienen al país, con excelencia absoluta de cualquier otro sistema de gobierno. It's liberal.
Liberal, yeah, no.
Extremely liberal, right? Now, when you say it's liberal, what is liberal about it?
Well, almost everything that you.
What do you understand? Like what?
It's very nationalistic.
So it's nationalist, right? That's a liberal idea.
It's talking about public liberty.
People
Where-
having rights.
Yeah, people
So it
having
talks
rights.
about rights.
It's talking about the All Brothers.
So it talks about freedom and rights. That part is very liberal. Now,
And it's talking about the government.
another thing to consider is how it talks about how this whole idea that Santa Ana is a bad president. We need a new president that does things the right way. Is that liberal or conservative?
Liberal.
Liberal.
Extremely liberal, right?
Liberal.
This moral justification that says if we have a president that is a bad president, we need a good one that does things in a better way. Very liberal, the moral justification. Now, does it talk about individual perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? It
Yeah.
mentions sacrificando a nuestros hermanos. It mentions los pueblos, right? So it talks about communities. It talks about Mexicans. So people are being wronged, right? Is this liberal or conservative?
Total liberal.
Liberal, right? So this whole plan is the basis for what would later become the War of Reform. In the Revolución de Ayutla, the liberals win and institute the Constitution of 1857, which was extremely liberal. It was so liberal that it was difficult to do anything under it, really. Because the thing about liberalism is that it sounds great. You're like, yes, we can choose things and we can be free. But it assumes a couple of things that are not very easy to assume. It assumes that people are trustworthy and that people will do what they are asked to do.
Which is not
Right?
true.
It mostly, in general, it assumes that people will always try to do the right thing. Right?
Which is not true.
It's not true, right? Sometimes people are not trustworthy. Sometimes people are bad governors. Sometimes people don't know what they want, right? So that doesn't really work. And under the Constitution of 1857, the issue was that it was so liberal that it didn't really take a lot of points of conflict into account. And it was mostly like, so many things should be done because people, on the way people agree. But if people are necios or they're ambitious or they're not okay with the new system, are they just going to agree on things?
No.
Not really. And that's what led Benito Juarez to kind of lead by decree. To just be like, you know what, Congress, I don't care. We're going to do these few things because I'm the president and we need to do them. That's the reasoning behind people saying that Benito Juarez would have been kind of a dictator, right?
Yeah.
So obviously there was opposition to this type of governing by a liberal president. So the opposers brought up what we know as the first Plan de Tacubaya. There's another Plan de Tacubaya in the Mexican Revolution 50 years later, but here we're talking about the first one. So can someone read this excerpt, please? Maria?
Where's Tacubaya?
Me.
Tacubaya here in Mexico City. There's a Metro Tacubaya.
Not too, yeah. There's a hospital.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Pero yo pensé que estaba en otro.
No.
No. Okay.
No.
No, generally you will see conservatives centering in Mexico City and liberals in Provincia.
Okay.
It's more obvious in the Mexican Revolution. We'll actually talk about this later, but think of it this way. Do you know of any Mexican revolutionaries who are chilangos? Anyone?
No.
No.
None.
Oh.
Why?
Yeah. Not relevant right now, though. So look at Plan de Tacubaya. Maria, can you read it for us, please?
Yes. Considerando que la mayoría de los pueblos no ha quedado satisfecha con la carta fundamental que le dieran sus mandatarios, porque ella no ha sabido hermanar el progreso con el orden y la libertad, y porque la oscuridad en muchas de sus disposiciones ha sido el germen de la guerra civil. Considerando que la República necesita de instituciones análogas a sus usos y costumbres y el desarrollo de sus elementos de riqueza y prosperidad, fuente verdadera de la paz pública y del engrandecimiento y respetabilidad de que es tan digna en el interior y en el extranjero, considerando que la Fuerza Armada no debe sostener lo que la nación no quiere, y sí ser el apoyo y la defensa de la voluntad pública, bien expresaba ya de otras maneras.
De todas maneras. Okay, so is this plan liberal or conservative?
Liberal.
Liberal.
What part is liberal?
No, it's conservative.
No, it's
They talk
conservative.
about freedom. It's conservative.
What part is conservative?
The
It's-
first part
Talks about
they
it's talking about people.
talk about
Yeah.
tradition.
It talks about tradition.
Yes, and that's conservative. Also,
Very
they talk
conservative.
about order.
And
And freedom.
But,
Freedom.
no
but
order, but
also they have the other part where they talk about what people want and having freedom. So it's like kind of mixed.
it's not very mixed, because the thing about order and liberty is that, think of it this way: freedom means individual perspective and being able to do whatever you want. Liberty, on the other hand, means not be a slave, not be oppressed, right? So
for
kind of different viewpoints. Now here it talks about, does it talk about any moral justification where it says we need to find a government that does things the right way? Or
No.
does it say we actually need a government that maintains order, right?
Yes.
The federal government is not
Yes.
even doing that. And if the government does anything, it should be to keep people in cintura, right?
yes,
So is that liberal or conservative?
Conservative.
conservative.
Very conservative. Now, when it talks about institutions in the second paragraph, does it talk about figuring out the best type of institutions? Does it talk
Yeah.
about representation? Does it talk about representing different sections of Mexican society?
No.
Not really. What does it say?
It's institutions that
It talks about
are
traditions.
Just for
tradition.
the
So the whole point here is, from a liberal perspective, if you have a pueblo in the middle of Oaxaca where everyone just does whatever the priest says and they are oppressed and they are poor, in a liberal government, you should find a way to change the system so each individual in that pueblo can find what makes them happy, right? And if that means forcing them to have elections, you do it. If that means getting rid of that priest, you do it. But it's because it's the best way to do things. But under a conservative view, from a conservative viewpoint, you find a pueblo where there's a priest who oppresses everyone in charge. What do? Do you force them to have elections? Do you force them to have a president?
No, he's
No.
doing fine.
Are you gonna be like,
No.
tiene que haber un presidente municipal, me vale mamá?
No.
You're just gonna be like, usos y costumbres, right? That's how it works. It works. You still do it because it works. Great. Instituciones análogas a usos y costumbres, right? Similarly, maintaining the peace as the main role of the government is very conservative, right? It's this whole notion that the government is not necessarily there to do what's best, but it's there to maintain the rigid social structure, right?
Yeah.
So no revolutions, no invasions, just maintain public peace. So could we say this is a very conservative plan?
yes.
Yes, it is. And the issue
Yes.
is, we know the liberals won. We know Juarez specifically won. And we know that liberalism is very important for Mexico nowadays. But could we see elements of both these plans in the way we talk about Mexico and its politics nowadays?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Like what?
Totally.
Like the institution.
The importance on usos y costumbres.
So in Mexico, we have kind of the two systems. In some parts of the country, people are forced to have liberal institutions. In other parts of the country, they are allowed to maintain usos y costumbres.
I want to call it converalism.
Right? Now, another thing is, think of the way we learn about Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna giving up half the territory of Mexico. Do we learn about it as in, well, yeah, the president is allowed to do that. He decided to do it. It's fine. Or do we learn about it like, picó a nuestros hermanos en la frontera norte? Which
He
of the
gave
two?
only pretty part of the country.
The second one.
Mostly the second one, right? Now, the thing is, there were from a conservative viewpoint, if you have a part of the country where there's not a lot of people and a more powerful opponent wants it, If you're conservative, you can just be like, well, I mean, just take it, right? It's not very relevant, doesn't really matter. If you're a liberal, and you're the leader, so it's your decision. But in a liberal government, can you just be like, okay, fine, take it. I'm not going to ask anyone. No, not at all, right? So we're very liberal about this kind of thing, about territory. However, think nowadays in parts of Mexico where organized crime has caused a lot of violence, and people take out their frustration against the government, asking for change. But what type of change do they ask for? Do they ask the government to consider all options and figure out what's best for society? Or do they ask the government to maintain public order and maintain peace?
Maintain public order and peace.
Right? And sometimes the government, for example, when President Calderon sent the army to specific states to control organized crime, and he tried to justify it saying this is the best thing to do, this is the morally responsible thing to do, right? There's even a quote where he says, no voy a dejar que el crimen organizado nos gane, lo moralmente responsable es mandar al ejército. And people, were they like, well, okay, I mean, this is what's morally responsible, or were they like, you know, what would be morally justified would be to do this other thing, maybe consider this other course of action? Or were they just like, no, queremos orden, no ejército?
No, queremos orden.
Right?
I don't know.
So that is very conservative, right? That is very much, déjanos seguir haciendo las cosas como las hacemos siempre, no mandes al ejército, no nos importa que sea lo correcto. Right? Now, I'm not saying it's the right thing. I'm saying we don't care that you think it's the right thing, right? So the question remains, in Mexico right now, are we more liberal or are we more conservative?
More conservative.
But we also
conservative.
Depends where
we are liberal.
It's more conservative because the thoughts of the people are still conservative.
But institutions are mostly liberal.
It depends where you live, I think.
Yeah, it's like
That's
I
a
think
very good point.
Yeah,
Because, for example,
here,
on
like,
the south of the country, like most of people still be conservatives.
Yeah.
Like, want tradition, they want order, they want church, they want everything.
Mm-hmm.
So they are not that liberal. I could say our city is more liberal than conservative.
Well, in some things, because you could say Mexico City is more liberal in terms of inclusion of people and things, but
also
think
because
of it this way, think of it this way. Some universities can ask to have their graduation ceremonies in El Auditorio Nacional, right? Tech has considered it, UNAM has considered it, Ibero has considered it. However, would we be okay with a CONALEP having their graduation ceremony in Auditorio Nacional?
No.
Right?
Well,
So the idea is funny, but why is it funny? We're all equal,
Because-
aren't we?
people think it's poor, so
Aren't we all equal? Aren't we all
It's like
equal?
they have
And the
a
Auditorio
rule.
Nacional pertenece a la nación.
yes,
They
But-
could, but
people think it's not right because it's like
they are not
discrimination.
No,
I suppose.
my point here was just that you can't really say that this part is liberal and this part is conservative when you talk about parts of Mexico, because there are aspects, right? There are different
Yes.
aspects where you can kind of
we're supposed to have
But that's the way with every
a
country.
liberal
right?
ideology,
Yeah.
right? But we are also with conservative traditions.
Yeah.
But for
Because
example,
I remember, I'm going to tell you a fast story, right? In my school, my last school, my school was Catholic school. So everything was like, okay, because God is a great something, they give you all these things, right? But it was also about to include people, to do not discriminate, to, liberal things, but
Yeah. So the thing is,
dictated by God. I don't
the
know.
conclusion here is, in Mexico nowadays, in Mexican state building, we started off extremely conservative. We had a phase of extreme liberalism in the War of Reform. Now, the thing is, we kind of live with an amalgamation of these ideas in our heads. right? To an extent, and in some contexts, we are very liberal and we are comfortable with it, and we are very rational about liberalism. But in other aspects, we are very conservative, and we are comfortable with the situation. We are comfortable with social status, and that's how it is, right? The thing is, especially when we talk about in an election year, we need to be very clear about how our ideas make sense in our heads, but how they make sense outside our heads, right? Because maybe we are comfortable with laughing about a CONALEP having its graduation ceremony in el Auditorio Nacional, but at the same time, isn't that kind of mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is,
Would
bro.
it be okay with a presidential candidate being like, ay, es que son pobres, obvio no pueden entrar al Auditorio Nacional? No,
No,
not
No.
really.
it's
And
not
yet,
about
that is
it.
the kind of conversation we could be having in confidence, right? So I'm not saying we need to settle it right now. I'm saying we need to be very reflective of how we are comfortable with this type of, well, I'm not going to say hypocrisy because that's kind of,
mean.
well, it's mean, and also it implies that you're doing things to keep it that way. But it is a dichotomy, right? It's two sides of something that don't really make sense together, but we kind of have them at the same time. So, any questions?
No.
Okie dokie. By the way, there are asesorías in the Colegio Alemán tomorrow. Does anyone want to go?
Yo,
I should.
Because I
I
need to
don't
write.
know.
I need to write your names down if you want to
but
go.
at what time is it? Because I cannot be there at 4.
It's from 4 to 7.
Okay, I can. Yeah, wait for me.
So Diana,
I want to go, but I'm not sure.
Can I send you a remind later because I'll have to ask my parents?
Yes, me too.
yeah,
Me too.
just let me know and on remind
Yes.
today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye. See you on
Bye.
Monday.
See you.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.